Welcome back to another episode of Software Without Borders. I'm your co-host, Jarrett Streiner, and with me is my co-host, the CEO of Accelerance, Andy Hilliard. Our guest today is Ron Lichty. Ron is a renowned speaker and author of Managing the Unmanageable, Making Software Development Hum. Ron untangles the knots in software development, turning around long-delayed products, leading predictable product and project delivery, training and coaching agile, implementing effective product processes, improving practices, transforming product organizations from chaos to clarity. Welcome, Ron.
Hey, good to see you guys.
Let's kick off this episode and tell us a little bit more about the book.
Well, so my co-author is Mickey Mantle, not the baseball player, and Mickey and I had spent probably a decade or more leading engineering organizations, and we were getting together on weekends to share rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom around and the challenges around managing software development organizations. And we ended up saying, we've been sharing rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom with each other. Maybe we should share them more broadly. And that became the foundation for the book. The second part was that there are so few books on managing software developers and software people and teams that we ended up writing 10 chapters around those rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom.
Hey, Ron. I've known you for quite a while now, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey from practitioner, leader to thought leader and book writer to educator, because I know you run a lot of groups too. So can you walk us through that history?
Yeah, so I when I entered the technology realm, it was as a programmer, and I spent about 7 years as a programmer in a two-person consulting company, where I get to write compiler code generators. I got to write stuff that made embedded microcontroller devices. We get to write multimedia stuff. We wrote one of the applications for Apple. Apple Computer contracted us to create the demo program that played in all the stores all around the world when they released a new computer. And toward the end of 7 years, I got curious about managing software development. And in a two-person company, there's no managing involved. But Apple actually made me an offer to come manage a product management group for development tools. And I spent about 2 years managing different aspects of development tools for Apple Computer, and then said, I really enjoy engineering more than product management. I went back to being a programmer at Apple. They made me a manager. I went back to being a programmer at Apple. They made me a manager. Third time in, I accepted my fate as a manager. And then I got to manage the development team developing the UX of the Macintosh Finder, and I spent 3 years doing that, and that was just wonderful. And then I got promoted to being a director. I went to another company to be promoted to be a director of engineering. I managed flying toasters and After Dark and screensavers at Berkeley Systems. Entertainment software, and I spent 3 years in the entertainment software world before getting hired into Charles Schwab at the dawn of web trading, the dawn of the web, actually, and spent 7 years at Schwab. Ended up being promoted to a VP of engineering at Schwab and getting to lead an initiative across all of Schwab to bring successful change and a single platform, a single programming language, and it was really fun. So then, when I left Schwab, it was to work in smaller organizations, and then I went to Stanford for a final FTE role, for a final full-time engineer management role, leading software development at Stanford. And when I left there, it was to pivot into consulting. I had been training teams in Agile for friends, and I ended up training. I counted them up last year. I've delivered 176 Agile trainings as of the end of last year. I really pivoted to consulting to be an interim VP of engineering and a fractional VP of engineering, and worked with you guys actually in doing that. and I do assessments of software development organizations, and I do coaching of engineering leaders.
Wow, that's really interesting. I could see where you started accumulating all of this practitioner and experiences in different organizations and different size organizations, and accumulating a lot of stories and a lot of like I would have done this differently or looking back, this and that, and then you sort of evolved into sort of the educational side, which then facilitated your consulting practice.
Yeah, one of the things that Mickey and I realized as we were putting together the book was that the transition from being a programmer to managing programmers, to managing software people and teams, is a really hard one. We, as programmers, we bull our way through learning every language we have to learn and every process we have to learn, and then at some point somebody says, "Oh, you're a good programmer, and you've got a few people skills. We'll make you the manager." And then and they think, "Well, we'll bowl our way through management." And you look back at the first team you managed and say, "I'm sorry." That's a totally different skill set, and there's so little training for it. There's so little. There were so. I mean, at the point at which we wrote our book, we counted 7 books in the history of programming that had been written about managing programmers. So there really wasn't very much, and we thought, well, we've got to we have a lot. School of Hard Knocks. Let's share what we learned and what we've learned from a ton of other people around us, in the form of a book.
Well, I want to spend a lot of today talking about how the principles in your books, how your teaching today is universally set in stone, how it is evolving. The three of us, I would throw Jared in there also, have quite a bit of experience on this planet. And at our age, we like to keep things, like there's some universal truths, and there could be, but also the world around us is evolving. So for example, as you know, when you contributed to my book Synergia, that co-location used to be the normal way of building teams and organizing teams and creating culture and all of that. And today, most teams are distributed. Some are through partnerships, some are through contractors, some are through FTEs that are located in different places, whether it's domestically or even locally, but no one's like sitting next to one another necessarily. Some are, some aren't. So
yes,
for example, how do your principles, how universal and fixed in stone are they, and how are they applicable to the evolving landscape?
yeah, I think so. We, in the center section of Managing the Unmanageable, our book is 300 rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom that we think that managers of software people and teams need to know and think about. One that's not in there. It is in the book. It's not in that center section, though. Is core to how I think about software development, which is that software development is a team sport, and whether we're co-located or whether we're spread apart, it's a team sport. For example, up until the pandemic happened, most of the agile trainings that I was delivering, now 176 or 177 or 78, but most of the ones I was delivering were in person. I would show up and we'd all be in the same room and we'd do all those kinds of things. And there were a few remote, basically hybrid organizations that I was doing to bring people in India, people in South America, people in other places in, but only a little bit. And so the pandemic happens, and of course we're all remote from each other for safety reasons. And I just retooled what I was already doing for the remote teams and the hybrid teams into being entirely remote. And since the pandemic began, even though many people are coming together, they're acting in remote and hybrid ways almost no matter what. And with the result that doing agile training, you're thinking about, well, how do we work together? We may come together once a quarter or once a year, but and ideally we do that, particularly at milestones. It's a really useful thing to come together. But fundamentally, we're working remotely with each other the whole time, and so we need those techniques and those tools to do that work. And so I have not had an in-person training since the pandemic began, even though some teams say, well, we're in person, and then you begin to dig in and you discover that, well, we're really not.
So, Ron, I love when you say that software development is a team sport, as Andy and I are both former college athletes. I was a swimmer. Andy played hockey. So, you're passing the puck for him, and I'm doing a relay, right? Now that people are no longer together, so there's no one technically to pass off to. How in a distributed world do you keep that team functioning together when there is handoffs, when you're not able to get up and walk a couple cubicles down, or be able to just go to somebody's office and knock on the door and like, hey, do you have a second? How do we keep that team dynamic going with a co-located world?
I think one of those places is and Scrum introduced this, actually, the notion of a daily stand-up. If software development is a team sport, maybe we ought to talk to each other at least once a day. And if you look at teams, if you look at football teams, they have a stand-up for every play. And if you look at a basketball team, watch them huddle, watch the whole basketball team huddle every time that there's a foul. They'll huddle together before they split off for the free throws, and they're talking to each other. They're having those conversations about what they're seeing and how to adjust and how to be there. So I think the daily stand up is critical to how we work together, and it too often. So I'm also the co-author of the study of product team performance, and my co-authors and I. This is a free study that you can find from my website, ronlichty.com, or from the book's website, managingtheunmanageable.net. The studies, we did 7 of them over about a decade, and one of the things we asked about were stand-ups, and what we discovered was that we asked about how effective are your stand-ups, and we also asked about how frequent they were. And what we found were that those teams that were not doing stand-ups correlated. And so we began by asking. So we asked people on product, a little bit of context. We asked people on product teams all over the world to tell us about their teams. Is it a high performance team? Is it a low performance team? Is it something in between? And then we asked about practices. And so with stand-ups, we were asking, are they effective and how frequent are they? And then we had a data science member of our team who looked to see if there was any correlation. Many times there wasn't, but with stand-ups there was. And what we found was that those teams that did not do stand-ups, that had no stand-ups, correlated with the lowest performance teams, but those people who said our team is low performance. And as frequency increased, the characterization of teams rose toward higher performance, and so those people who said we have stand-ups daily, we have effective stand-ups daily, correlated with the highest performance teams. And then you look into so what makes a stand-up effective, and what you too often find is that stand-ups have become status meetings. It's like, giving, what did I do yesterday? It's what am I going to do today? I'm going to go to a bunch of meetings. I went to a bunch of meetings. I did a bunch of stuff. And the point of the stand-up is really, what did I accomplish? What did I accomplish against our sprint plan? We're doing Scrum. And what am I going to accomplish today against our sprint plan? We're doing Scrum. And then the crucial third piece, which pretty much works pretty well in most stand-ups regardless, is what's standing in my way, and what do we need to resolve? What impediments are in the way? And what I try to get teams to do is to switch from that, what did I do and what am I going to do, to what did I accomplish against our sprint plan and what are we going to accomplish? What am I going to accomplish against our sprint plan to get today? As well as to switch to just me, just telling about me, to how about us? Are we as a team on track for our sprint plan? And we're going to do all that in 15 minutes or less, ideally
Sure.
less. And bringing that teamness together. How are we going to adjust? It's normal for somebody to walk into code and discover that there's a ton of technical debt in there, or the algorithm I went in thinking I could use is not going to work for us, or any number of other things, and maybe one of the other of us has to come to the rescue of that person and help them out in order for the team to stay on track with its sprint plan. So teams coming together, software development's a team sport. Teams coming together in that stand-up to say, how do we solve for being on track with our plan?
So you mentioned, these stand-ups being 15 minutes, and it sounds like there's a lot of important things to get accomplished, and maybe some superfluous stuff that shouldn't be involved in that. And there is a time commitment, to pre-meeting, post-meeting, and in the meeting itself. You even do a technique called Fist of Five, I guess, which I'm not sure how universally it is used, but can you describe that and other sort of how to organize that 15 minutes?
Yeah, and to go back to Jared's question, so we we're spread out, we're remote from each other. One of the things that many teams will do is to start their to open their channel, to open the three of us are talking remotely from each other, and we got together a few minutes before we began talking to say hi to each other. So opening the channel so that our team can just, what's the weather like? What's your situation like? How are your kids today? Those kinds of things before the stand-up starts. Then when the stand-up starts, we want to be very focused on how are we doing, and how are we doing, it involves everyone, what they've accomplished over the past 24 hours, what they're going to accomplish over the next 24 hours for our sprint plan, and what's standing in my way, what do we need to resolve to make us all productive and make us all happy. And then, Andy, so the Fist of Five, there's an agile technique called Fist of Five in which all of us vote. And so we're going to turn on our cameras, and all of us on a signal to a question are going to respond to that question with some number of fingers on our hands, or 0 fingers on our hands. And the question at the end of a stand-up is, how confident are we that we're on track to meet our sprint plan? And if everybody's voting 5s and 4s, I'm happy. And the scrum master should be happy, and the manager should be happy, and the team should be happy. We got 4s and 5s. If somebody's voting a 3 or 2 or a 1 or even a fist says there's no way in hell we're going to make our sprint plan. This is just not happening. And at that point, is there a way that the team can adjust? So, there's a joke about, what's the difference between an introverted and extroverted programmer? An extroverted programmer is looking at your shoes when he's talking to you. And so we tend to have quiet people sometimes, and that Fist of Five is I don't think we're going to make it. Well, why? Well, Ron said he's got problems over here, and I didn't hear anybody say that they're going to help him out, and I think we're in trouble. It's like, oh, okay, so can somebody help him out? Judy says, yeah, I can help you out, Ron, and I can come in and fix that. Now, it may be that everybody's underwater, and we're not going to make our sprint plan. And now it's time for our product owner, who needs to be in that meeting, to say, here's the thing we're not going to do. Because clearly, if we keep going at the pace we're going with the problems we've got, we're not going to finish something let's right now identify the thing we're not going to finish, the thing that will have the least impact on our stakeholders and our customers by not finishing at the end of the 2 weeks. And I will go tell our stakeholders that our plan is reduced by that thing because of the stuff we've run into. So there's good team interaction that happens as a result of just doing that simple technique, that simple practice as we think we're done with our stand up, to say, are we really done? Are we really on track? What do we have to do?
Yeah. So I feel like the Fist of Five will help narrow down the focus of the call. But when do you get to the point of diminishing returns on stand-ups? Because I know I've been through a ton of agile stand-ups, and depending on who's in the room, that amount of time either you don't get through to everything or you get lost in the minutia because there's just so much going on. So at what point do you like say, okay, let's put a timeout on this. We're not getting through the sprint the way we want, because sometimes the creative comes into the room, which a lot of times will blow it everything up when you have a room full of programmers and one creative, which was me, in our sprint sometimes. But knowing that the sprint is there for effectiveness, how do you know when, okay, it's time maybe to instead of 1, 5, or 0, you just kind of do one of these?
So there's a rule about time boxes that if we're not getting everything done in the time box that we've set for it, the first thing to try is shortening the time box, say from 15 minutes to 12 minutes. Usually what's happening, if we're not getting the work that we need to get done in the stand-up, it's usually because we're doing work that shouldn't be in the stand-up. The stand-up's there to identify impediments that need to be solved. Okay, so who needs to help solve those impediments? Or there's a technical problem, and Judy and Ron, can you meet offline? Is there anybody else who wants to meet with you who wants to be part of that or should be part of that meeting offline? It will meet it as soon as the 15 minutes is up. Good Scrum Masters are constantly spinning off other meetings because we don't want the whole team subjected to what Ron and Judy need to talk about. Ron and Judy need to talk about that. The other thing is that sometimes stand-ups get into the what did I do on my summer vacation kinds of activities that should have been dealt with by opening the channel earlier and getting those done before we started our 15-minute stand-up, because those are important too, but not during the stand-up meeting.
Hey, Ron,
So
can I
yeah, can I add one more thing? I was
Absolutely.
interim VP of engineering for a team in Portland a couple of years ago, and I was brought in as the interim VP of engineering because their VP of engineering took another job down the street and left with 2 weeks notice. And I came in and discovered there was only one manager in the whole development organization. He was managing QA and he was acting as the Scrum Master. And he started their stand-ups on time. So these are physical, although there were a few remote people, so it was a hybrid team. They started them on time. They did the go-round, and at the end of the stand-up, he did this really interesting thing, which he named the number of people in the stand-up and how many minutes. And it was never 15 minutes. It was 12 and a half or 13 or 11 and there was this sort of celebration of, wow, we got done what it is that we wanted to get done in our stand-up, and we did it in under 15 minutes. And I think celebrating the accomplishment of the stand-up itself was a cool thing.
So we're talking about software as a team sport, and we've been talking about sort of empowerment of teams and accountability of teams, and we'll get into some psychological safety things. But first and foremost, how do you get a software development function with people in teams or outside of teams to accept and to alter the way the center of empowerment lies and sort of accountability lies? How how do you shift that from a maybe dysfunctional or non-optimized way to a better optimized environment?
So, um, if I understand the question right, you're asking how do we take teams which people are not taking responsibility to one in which
Yeah.
they do, and I think there's so I used to get asked. I used to get asked when I started doing agile trainings 15 years ago. It was mostly transforming waterfall teams to agile, and I would get asked the question fairly frequently. Well, is there a kind of software that agile is not appropriate for? And I just racked my brain trying to think of what kind of software is agile not appropriate for, and it took me the longest time to realize that I had the answer to this, but the question was wrong. The question really is there a culture that agile is not appropriate for? And the culture that agile is not appropriate for is micromanagement. In micromanagement, managers and executives tell people what to do, and people stand around with their hands in their pockets saying, okay, tell me what to do next. There's no autonomy, there's no responsibility. There's only I'll tell you what to do, you give it to me. It's an order taking kind of environment. And what we need to do is create a culture that nurtures responsibility, it nurtures autonomy, that nurtures teamness, and teams coming together and working together and being effectively together. And Google did a study some years ago in which they were looking for what are their highest performance teams. And Google, just like the rest of us, Google has teams that are high performance and teams that aren't. Unlike the rest of us, Google has a ton of money, and they spend it on studying things. And so they said, well, we'll study why we have teams that aren't high performance. So they set up the Aristotle team, and the Aristotle team did the Aristotle study over a period of a couple of years. They went into it thinking, oh, it's going to be the makeup of the teams. It's like who's on that team is going to determine that they're high performance or not high performance. And it turned out that it had nothing to do with the makeup whatsoever. That their high performance teams were as diverse as their low performance teams. But what differentiated them, the number one thing, far greater than anything else about their high performance teams, was that they had two words that I had never heard used in the realm of software development before. Those two words being psychological safety. Those teams had psychological safety, and they said you can observe it. This is really great. You can observe, you watch those teams have team meetings, and you will see equality in conversational turn taking. That is, there's no one who is silent and there's no one who dominates. There is equality in the amount of time that each person contributes to the team. I think that's where Agile was always going when various different sets of practices got invented in the 1990s. That's where they were always going, was toward teams in which everyone took responsibility. Back to your question, Andy, in which everyone on the team took responsibility. And what we need to, in order for people to do that, they need to be able to take the risk that they might say something stupid, that they might make a suggestion that everyone would laugh at. And they've got to be in an environment in which they laugh together, in which they feel comfortable making those kinds of statements. And so, and when I'm doing Agile trainings, I point out to teams that even their intern needs to be a leader, needs to feel like a leader, needs to be able to step up and contribute from something that they've been learning in school that nobody else knows, because there's something new in school this year that wasn't there last year and the year before, and several years before that for the three of us. Everyone needs to come from their expertise and their experience to be able to step forward and be a leader. I describe it as being like, if we were an acting group, what kind of acting group would we be? Well, we'd be an improv group because everyone in an improv troupe leads. It's just that there's only one leader at a time. And in order to be that leader, you have to listen to know when to be that leader. And while you're leading, you have to continue listening to hear that someone else is taking the leadership. And that listening to each other and being aware of each other is something that as managers we need to build, we need to nurture.
So can we apply this thought process to the definition of done? Maybe like how it has traditionally been defined, who owns it versus, maybe a better way to do it.
I'm not sure that the definition of done was traditionally defined. So I'm going to go there first, which is that I didn't run into definitions of done until I ran into Agile. It occurs to me that Agile introduced it. And if it did, I think it's one of the most powerful practices that Agile introduced. And the practice is not managers telling teams what done is. It's teams coming together and as a team identifying what it is that they have to call out in order to be done for every single story. It occurred to me that it might relate to high performance teams, and so we tested it in the study of product team performance. And we didn't just ask the question, do you have a definition of done? We asked who creates your definition of done, and one of the answers is we don't have one. And we looked for correlations, and sure enough, there was a correlation, and the teams that did not have definitions of done correlated with the lowest performance teams. But then there was a correlation with who created it. When that definition of done was created by the team, those teams correlated with the highest performance teams. So when people contribute to so as a manager before Agile, I had people say, "Well, I'm done. It works on my machine." I'm sure you've never heard that. I'm done. It works on my browser. I've actually had somebody say, "I'm done. It compiles." I'm done. I checked it in. And so what does it mean? So checking used to be that checking in needed to be a bullet on the definition of done. When I went to Berkeley Systems, the After Dark company, we discovered that the company had lost some critical code because the developers had not checked it in. Yeah, it was on somebody's hard disk and they were gone. That happens more automatically these days, and so that's probably not one of the bullets on our definition of done, but probably there is a bullet around the code being reviewed by somebody other than the person who wrote it, or we pair programmed in order to get that code done, which means that we had that code review happening in the moment as that programming was being done. There are different kinds of tests, different kinds of check-ins, different kinds of responsibilities for every single story, and the team coming together in about, my experience has been about 45 minutes. I've had a team taken a little over an hour. I've had another team come in at a half hour. But the team coming together before they write any lines of code to say, here's what done means, is just an exceptional experience. And then everybody's bought into it. Everybody knows what it is. You've got the product managers and the product owners in the room, the QAs in the room, developers are in the room. Here's what we have to have this done.
That's great.
Isn't that a marvelous practice?
It sounds nirvana. Yeah.
It's one of those things that once we had it, it would make life easier. So I used to live in the world of we had files named final, 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 final. And I hate to say it, I have used the "it worked in my browser" excuse previously until they had cross-browser testing. As soon as that came out, it made life a lot easier. And someone who, started out hand coding, websites and moving into other parts of marketing, as soon as, I worked in a company that had a whole lot of developers and someone told me about, Agile, I'm like, I don't understand why marketing is not using Agile more frequently, as this would get us through the work more. So I did go to one company and their dev team is like, "We need you." And I'm like, "What do you need me for?" And they're like, "I need you to come into our stand-ups." I'm like, "Have you worked in Agile before?" I'm like, "Yes." So that was where I said, the creative person comes into the room because they didn't know how to do UI UX, but they knew how to compile the code of what I did. And what I found was now this became, instead of just a bunch of developers doing something, this was a cross department communication, right? They brought the marketing guy into the dev team. Now, how do we make sure that when you do step out of just a development team inside of an agile frame and you open this up to a couple other departments coming into it, how do you keep the sprints moving along for maybe someone who doesn't live in the agile environment at all times, but that person is either in product or in design or even in finance where they're now part of this sprint to keep everything still working in that 12 to 15-minute time frame where everybody can work together and keep at the same pace?
So when we're talking about stand-ups, I'm looking for the developer. I'm looking for everybody who's working on the product, and that's developers, testers. There may be a designer. There may be a product. There should be a product manager. Actually, the product manager should be in the room, but I don't want anybody else in the room because they will be distracting. What we're looking for is what did I accomplish against our sprint plan? And the sprint plan is the people who are working on it. What am I going to accomplish today against our sprint plan, and what's standing in our way? And we've got a scrum master in the room who, ideally, we've got a scrum master in the room whose job it is to resolve impediments, to make sure that impediments are resolved, whether they're the person who resolves them or not. If we've got stakeholders, then we've got that's our product owner's responsibility is to have is to do that reporting out to our stakeholders and to bringing to embody the stakeholders in the room, to be their proxy in the room, and to have those conversations. But we've built that in our sprint plan already. Our sprint plan should be what everyone inside the room and outside the room agrees is that this is what we're trying to accomplish for this probably 2 weeks, because more sprints than not are 2 weeks, but it might be 1 or 3 or 4. But this is what we're going to accomplish in the course of our sprint plan. Am I answering your question?
Oh, you are. 'Cause, the thing I found when, once again, when you're not sitting with the dev team all the time, you're someone coming from a different department, knowing Agile by knowing Agile, but not studying it. Oh, we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page because I do notice in meetings, no matter the company, when you get people from different departments, there are certain questions that happen. There are certain things that derail your time frame. And the thing is, you want to keep clarity for everybody because you talked about, chaos to clarity. And I always joke around the beginning of any athletic season. If we go back to the sports, it's always chaos at the beginning, right? Does everybody have the uniform they need? Does everybody have, all the things they need to start, right?
Yeah.
Do you have pads? My son plays lacrosse. I was like, he goes, I hate my chest pad, so I'd order him a new one. So just, do you have the right equipment to make the season start so you can get clarity by the end? And that's always the important part, right? Getting from that chaos to clarity.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that directly address this. So I said that I do assessments of product organizations, and oftentimes I've been brought in to assess our development organization and discover they didn't have any product management. And surprise, the developers don't know what direction they're going in. Uh, Product management is core to doing good development. Um, but one of the things that I discover over and over again is that we've the product leaders and the executives and the stakeholders have a very clear idea of what they want. But you go talk to developers and they haven't got a clue why they're working on what they're working on. And I think we need to, we as leaders, whether we're engineering managers or whether we're product managers or whether we're executives, we need to make our mission a mantra. And we need to repeat it over and over again. It is one of Mickey and I in our book talked about motivation. We've got a whole chapter on motivation for software developers and software teams. And the motivation, number one motivation factor for software developers is making a difference. So once you're paid reasonably, you're not focused on money. You're not focused on bonuses. You're not focused on that kind of thing. You might be focused on upside. But far more than that is what kind of difference can we make in the world? Most of us who are software developers got into software development because we wanted to make an impact. We wanted to make a difference. We started coding and started showing it to our kids or our family or our friends, and we were looking to see their eyes light up with delight. We're trying to make that happen, and that message from the stakeholders, from us who are managers who understand why we're doing this, the executives, doesn't get to the developers, and I'll hear product managers saying, "Well, we told them." Well, how many times do you tell them? All salespeople, if you go talk to salespeople, all salespeople have some number of times they've got to say something in order to make a sale. You go talk to a salesperson. Oh, I've got to tell the story 7 times in order to make a sale, or 17 times, or 13, or 9. They've all got a number. They're different numbers, but it's never one. It's never telling that message once. It's always multiple times. We've got to repeat the message. We've got as managers, as engineering managers, we need to share with the individuals on our team, what's the work you're doing? What impact is that have? What contribution does that make? What outcome will we see as a result of that? That's motivational for developers, and it's really core. So that's one that I think is really really important. And then a second one is not interrupting developers. Not developers need to get into flow. I'll have a room full of developers and testers and product managers and ask the developers, so you finished work, Friday night came along and you're leaving work and it's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever time you're leaving work, and we're going to pretend that you don't work the weekend and that you don't think about your code again until Monday morning. And you come in on Monday morning and you left yourself some kind of note to say, here's where I left off. You come in on Monday morning, how long does it take you to write the next line of code? So Friday night, it probably took a minute. Monday morning, how long does it take? Somewhere between 15 minutes and half a day. And it depends on the complexity, but you've got to rebuild that context. And what you really want to do is you want to rebuild the context and rebuild the flow that you were in on Friday evening. And if you interrupt that, every interruption, I'll ask them, okay, so let's take some average here and say it takes you 30 minutes to develop that context. But on Monday, every 29 minutes, there's an interruption. How many lines of code do you get written? The answer is either 0 or, I wasn't quite there, so I quick wrote the line of code because I saw the interruption coming. Where do bugs come from? I wasn't quite there.
Ron, first, we're kind of getting towards the end, but I wanted to ask you, will you come on again? Because I'm only through a portion of the questions I wanted to ask you. And I mean, there's questions we've been focusing on, the empowerment and team dynamics and coordination and communication. And before we leave today, I want to talk a little bit external to the agile organization about, customer empathy and user centricity, because next session I want to get back into productivity and metrics and efficiency. So like a little bit of mix of both for both sessions. So I'm kind of like, will you come back first off?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about external to the agile organization. So can you talk a little bit about customer empathy first?
Yeah, I raised those two words. I thought that I invented those two words, putting those two words together back in the 90s when I was managing the team that was doing the UX of the Macintosh. I realized that I was hiring not just for C++ stellar coding ability, but also for customer empathy, because I wanted developers who were willing to write a bunch of code and then say, that's not going to delight our customers, I'm going to start over. And that willingness to start over on behalf of customers, I think, is just critical to back in the 90s. I thought, I'm hiring for customer empathy, but everybody will be doing this in 5 years. And it's now 25 years or 30 years later, and I'm not seeing a lot of customer empathy coming in the software world. There's just not enough caring about customers running into issues and problems and impediments. Our software should be transparent to our users. They should be thinking about their work and or their goals, or maybe it's entertainment software and it's their fun. They should not have the software be in their way.
Is it, the dynamics between stakeholders and budgets and fixed timelines and features and marketing and sales, how do you help an organization come together and prioritize the user experience so that everyone in the organization understands the importance of that?
I think that's tough, and a lot of folks in the UX realm are working on trying to figure out the answer to that one. I think though that customer expectations in this world are very highly UX dependent. They're expecting a level of software that I was going to say works like the Macintosh, although the Macintosh doesn't work as well as I think it did when I was there. I have an opinion on that. But there's an expectation that it should just work, that there should not be issues. And if we've got executives who don't understand that, we're probably not going to bring them into that world. But their companies probably aren't for the long term either, because that's what customers expect.
Well, thank you, Ron, for spending almost 4 full sprints with us. I really appreciate that. So, thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Software Without Borders. My name is Jared Striner, and my co-host Andy Hilliard, and we will see you on the next cast.
I'll say one last thing, Ron. 15 years ago, I think, I attended one of your meetups, and the one thing I took away from it was the difference between an extrovert and introvert developer, and I've been saying it ever since, and now I remember where I got it from. So thanks for the dad joke, the developer dad joke.
You're welcome, Andy.